You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Happy New Year, everyone. Let me start by welcoming you back to Public Square, a show about hot topics and current events that impact you, and more importantly, a show about how you can become more involved in the civic arena. I'm your host, Jerry Green. As I mentioned, it's officially 2022, and that means it's an election year. While the years that involve presidential elections often get the most attention from the general public and the media alike, midterms can have a big impact on our country, our state, and our community. Locally this year, many positions will be up for vote, from the county mayor to judges to school board members. Every elected official will be shaping policy and impacting our community. Today, we are going to explore the election process a little more in depth. My two guests today will not only give us an overview of the recent changes in our election system, but also talk about how this impacts the future of our state. First up, law professor Steve Mulroy, who has been a member of the faculty of the University of Memphis since 2000, teaching on a variety of topics, including election law. In fact, he wrote the book on it. It's called Rethinking U.S. Election Law, Unskewing the System. He's also participated in the litigation of over a dozen cutting-edge cases in the area of election law here in Tennessee, and has held office after successfully winning an election here in Shelby County. In short, he knows his stuff. Professor Mulroy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jerry. Pleasure to be here.
I want to start with some very basic things, including, setting the scene for this election, but on an even more basic level, who can vote in Tennessee and how can they register?
Sure. Well, any citizen of the United States who is a resident of Tennessee and is over 18 years old can register to vote unless they have a felony conviction of relatively recent vintage that would disqualify them and they haven't had their rights restored. And registering is a very simple process. You can get a registration form by going to your local election commission office or going to the website of your local election commission office and printing it out. It's a one-page form. You fill it out, you sign it. You can either mail it in to the election commission office or you can drop it off at the election commission office, and it doesn't take them very long to process it. And within a week or a couple of weeks, you'll get a voter registration card in the mail signifying that you are, in fact, a registered voter.
And once they're registered to vote, I think it's probably important that they find out who their representatives are, what elections are coming up. How do people figure out that information?
Well, your registration card will tell you what state house district, state senate district, school board district, city council district, and county commission district you're in. So that might be a start. A quick search online with that information can find out who your representatives are. And just looking at your local newspaper can tell you, what they stand for, what they're doing. The League of Women Voters publishes a pretty extensive guide every year. There's something they do called the Red Book, which gives you the name and contact information for all the different local elected officials. I think that's also information that might be available online from the LWV website. And there are other sources out there as well. It's only just a web search away.
And I mentioned at the top of the show that 2022 is going to be a midterm election. Tell us in general what we normally see in midterm elections.
Sure. Well, at the national level, we have congressional seats available, U.S. For election every 2 years, U.S. House seats, and then 1/3 of the U.S. Senate every 2 years is up for election. And so that election, the general election, will be in November. And the primary election for each party, Democratic and Republican, for those elections will be in August. The same is true for our state level offices. So governor, state house, state senate. The party primary is in August, and then the general election is in November. That's happening. At the same time, in even-numbered years here in Shelby County, county-level elections are occurring as well, and those are on a slightly earlier time frame. For county elections, so county mayor, district attorney, county commission, the party primaries are this year going to be on May 3rd, and then whoever becomes the nominee from those parties will face each other in the general election on August 4th.
And I'm thinking this year is going to be different in a lot of ways from what we saw in 2020, not just because it's not a presidential election, but some of the litigation I'm thinking of that you were involved in around, for example, mail-in voting with COVID restrictions. What do you see that happened in 2020 that we might see again, or that we won't probably see in 2022?
Well, in 2020, I led a litigation team that sued the state in order to expand mail voting access, absentee voting access during the global pandemic. And we were able to get broad relief. We were able to significantly expand the universe of people who were eligible to vote absentee during that time. However, that was a temporary measure to respond to the then global pandemic crisis. Fast forward 2 years, vaccines are widely available. It's possible that there could be litigation over that, but I suspect that it's sort of a different situation now. One thing that is going to be different, of course, is that we're going through redistricting right now. And so the district lines for Congress, for the state house and senate, and for local county commission districts have all been changed. There may be litigation over that because particularly with respect to what the state legislature has done with congressional districts, there may be some civil rights implications, and there may be litigation challenging that this year as well.
Some other litigation that you've been involved in that's around elections involves the actual machines themselves and paper ballots. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So most of the country uses what are called hand-marked paper ballots. So it's just like when you take the SAT test. It's a piece of paper, and you have a pen, and you fill in the little ovals, and that is how you indicate your voter preference. Then you stick that into a scanner. The scanner sucks it in. It both records electronically the vote and also keeps the paper record locked in that machine so that you have the paper and the electronic as ways of cross-checking on each other. The overwhelming consensus of experts around the country of election security and computer security say that that is the best system to actually be secure, to make sure that there's no hacking or glitching that could affect the integrity of the vote. As I said, most of the country does that. For years, Shelby County has used touchscreen machines without any kind of a paper trail backup. There's a big controversy right now going on between the county commission, which is a Democratic majority commission, and which has said it wants to use hand-marked paper ballots, and the Republican-controlled local election commission, which is insisting on continuing to use computerized machines. Now, those computerized machines, you'd press the touchscreen, that would spit out a piece of paper, which would then get sucked into the scanner. The problem is the scanner only reads a barcode. And so there's really no way for the voter to know whether the piece of paper that was generated accurately reflects their vote. And it is more subject to hacking and glitching than a hand-marked paper ballot system. There's currently litigation going on right now. The Election Commission has sued the County Commission to demand that the County Commission provide the funding so that they can go forward with their purchase of computerized systems. The County Commission, as the funding body, has, in my opinion, quite rightfully and legitimately said, no, we are not going to spend $6 million on an unsecure computerized system when we could spend 1/3 of that on a far more secure hand-marked paper ballot system. That's currently going on in court right now. I've been sort of helping on the sidelines, advising both as to the legal questions and then the policy questions involved as to what kind of voting machines we want.
I know another part of this that you have been involved in when it comes to elections locally and things that have happened around the country and around the world that are operating differently here is instant runoff voting. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that actually gives voters more of a voice?
Yes, yeah, thanks for the question, Jerry. Instant runoff voting, as we call it here in Memphis, it's also known as ranked choice voting, allows voters to not just vote for one person, but to say, here is my first choice, here is my second choice, and here is my third choice. And that's useful for a number of reasons. Very often, we have a situation in which there are 3 or 4 or 5 candidates, and they split the vote such that no one person gets a majority of the vote. And sometimes that can lead to perverse results. So say you have a majority Republican district, and most voters would want a Republican. If 5 Republicans run against 1 Democrat, those 5 Republicans could split the vote, and a Democrat could get in with, let's say, 30% of the vote because that person has more than all the other candidates. Well, that clearly doesn't reflect the will of the people in that district. Now, that's a problem. One way that we sometimes try to solve that problem is to have a separate runoff election 4 to 6 weeks later between the top 2 vote getters in the first election if no one gets a majority. But the problem there is that it's expensive and it's inconvenient to run that whole second election, and turnout usually goes way down. Here in Memphis, we have some city council districts that just say whoever gets the most votes. So if you have vote splitting, too bad. Some city council districts have a runoff, but turnout usually drops from about 25% in the first round all the way down to 5% in that second round. Because people they're busy. They can't keep going back to the polls over and over again. And that 5%, Jerry, is disproportionately white and wealthy. So it really leads to a skewing of the vote. Instant runoff voting allows you to do it all at once. You're one and done. If no one candidate gets a majority in that first round, the weakest candidate, the candidate with the fewest number of votes, is eliminated. And all those votes that were for that candidate are now redistributed among the remaining candidates based on what those voters had as their second choice. And you keep doing that until one person has a majority and is declared a winner.
Well, I'm sorry. I was going to say.
IRV or go ahead.
I think it's really important that we delve into how we run our elections, whether it's ranked choice voting, whether it's the kinds of machines, whether it's learning about who your candidates are that are running your current representatives. But I appreciate you being here today and taking us to class and telling us how we can get involved, because it certainly is important. And I'm wishing you much luck in the upcoming election as you run this time around.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Could I just mention one more thing real quick?
Sure.
So I wanted to mention that RCV, ranked choice voting, is used in many jurisdictions around the country. We're currently engaged in litigation right now because Memphis voters had voted 3 separate times saying that they wanted to use ranked choice voting. The state is saying that it's not legal. I happen to disagree. I'm leading a litigation team challenging that. That's in court right now. But also, as we speak, there's a bill pending in the state legislature by Brian Kelsey trying to abolish ranked choice voting in Tennessee. And I would just urge people, regardless of what they think about ranked choice voting, to tell their legislators to back off on that, because Memphis voters did vote for it 3 different times, and it seems like we should give it a try at least once and respect the will of the voters before the state legislature in Nashville tries to abolish it all and tell Memphis what to do.
Well, your vote is your voice, and there are many ways to use your voice, and I hope people get involved. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. Take care.
Please stay tuned as we continue our conversation about elections here on Public Square.
We see the potential in every single student.
That sounds like a confession to me.
I love watching these kids as they start as freshmen in high school and watching them mature and grow.
At last, my right home is complete again!
The theater program at GHS, it's something special.
Is very intensive, it's very interactive.
When a student starts here their freshman year, they start with Introduction to Theater. And after that year, they have a choice to either go into acting or technical theater. And then after that, they join our production workshop class. It's the class that is completely run by students.
The students do mostly everything. We build the sets, we do lighting, we make the costumes, we do the show.
We've got magic, we've got power.
It's very fun. I mean, everybody's very supportive of each other.
Now we're all in this together.
It's taught me so much about how to act and how to have a stage presence.
Not only are we teaching the students the skills that they need to be a great performer or a great stage manager or a wonderful lighting designer, we're teaching them skills that they're going to be able to apply to whatever they do in their life.
God bless us, everyone.
This department not only makes wonderful theater, but more importantly, this department makes wonderful people.
I won. I'm good. Get used to it.
For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to Public Square, a show about your community and how you can use your voice to make a difference. I'm your host, Jerry Green, and today we are talking all things elections. My next guest knows a thing or two about them and about using your voice to make an impact. Justin Canoe is the founder of the Tennessee Holler, an online presence that covers politics across the state of Tennessee, from the governor's office to school board happenings, from Memphis to Knoxville and everywhere in between. He also ran for Congress in 2018, so he's a little personal experience with elections too. And most recently, he went viral for speaking at a school board meeting. More on that later. But for now, Mr. Canoe, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
I invited you here because I thought you could give us a perspective across the state of some things that are happening, and I'd like to start with redistricting. Maps have just come out, and there's been a lot of shifts, especially here in Shelby County and where you are in Davidson County. Tell us about what's going on with redistricting this year.
Well, I guess generally what's going on is a power grab by the Republican supermajority. They redrew the lines to give themselves congressionally 8-1 split when they had 7-2. So that means that a state that's filled with 40% Democrats is going to have 90% Republican representation in Congress. They also did some cracking and packing with the rest of the maps, but basically in general, there was Nashville, splitting up Nashville into 3 pieces, and now Nashville, which is, the biggest economic hub in our state, a significant minority population, is now basically going to have no voice in Congress. And as a result, Representative Jim Cooper, who's been there for a really long time, he ended up announcing that he's not going to be running again. So, it's a steady drift away from voters choosing our representatives and towards representatives choosing our voters. Republicans will say that both sides do it, and they're right about that. Doesn't make it any better. So, it's a drift away from democracy, and we're seeing it at every level in our country right now.
And what are your thoughts on ways that we could make the process better, make it more transparent, make it more equitable?
Well, the thing about it is it has to be a federal solution, because you're not going to have a bunch of states disarm while the rest of the states are still doing it this way. You're not going to have red states choose their voter or choose their representatives one way while Democratic run states are choosing their voters through gerrymandering. So it has to be a federal solution. Meanwhile, we just saw bills that have this in them die because we have a filibuster. So, these federal solutions are necessary, but I don't know if there's a political will to make them happen. And so at the end of the day, this drift away from a democracy is just maybe something that we can't really stop, and it's pretty scary.
Let's talk a little bit about that national legislation, the John Lewis Rights Act. What was the basis of those laws, and what were they trying to do that got lost because of the filibuster?
Well, there was a lot in it. Obviously voter suppression was part of it. How we count the votes was part of it, but also gerrymandering, independent, fair districting. That's what we need to have. We need to see independent, fair districting. There, I think, are a couple states that have it. I think Michigan just passed something to have it, but basically until we have a situation where we have independent, fair committees looking at the numbers, looking at the districts and drawing them that way, we're going to have this gerrymandering. And that's bad for everybody. It's bad for Republicans in Democratic controlled states. It's bad for Democrats here in Tennessee, because you end up with these legislators who don't actually have to run in competitive races. They're not accountable to the people, and they end up doing really extreme things because all they really care about is their primary. So, we don't really have democracy here in Tennessee. We have a bunch of people who haven't had to be concerned about losing races, doing really extreme things and turning into huge bullies and corrupt ones at that when they get into office. And we're seeing the results of it here every single day in Tennessee, especially at the state capitol.
Let's talk a little bit about what that means as it trickles down into our laws, into what impacts us here as citizens. Having your voice diluted, especially, let's say, if you're in a purplish suburb, right? Something that was moving from red to blue. What happens when there is a supermajority in your state legislature, in your state Senate? What happens to your voice?
Well, what happens when you have a supermajority is you have people who are really, it's a race to the extremes. You can really throw out the Democratic voice when it comes to legislation that gets passed, because they don't need any Democrats in office to get this stuff passed. All they need is each other. So, there are some bills, like, for instance, the vouchers, where the Democrats played a part. But for the most part, all of the slate of hate, the anti-LGBT laws, the reproductive freedom laws, a lot of these things are really just them passing them by getting extremist Republicans on board. And all they really have to worry about from a re-election standpoint is their primary. So they're not worried about going home and dealing with whatever Democrats or even moderate Republicans are at home. They're just worried about pandering to extremists. And that's how we're seeing this legislation show up so easily here. And, it's really a situation where if they think of it, they can get it passed. That's not having things in balance. We're all better off when we have a balance. And right now, Tennessee is way out of balance.
There's another thing that's become a little bit more partisan. In fact, there was a bill passed to make school boards partisan elections, and it hasn't taken hold here in Shelby County. But you recently used your voice at a school board meeting and went viral. Talk to me about what it means to have even something like our school boards that should just be here to help children, to help educate our population, become partisan.
Well, no serious person in Tennessee or in the country, for that matter, thinks what we needed was more partisanship, especially when it comes to our kids and these seats that control our children's education. Senator Gardenhire, a Republican in Chattanooga, stood up when that bill was passed, and he said the Republican Party in Tennessee has gone off the rails. Gardenhire is not someone who says something like that easily. So, partisanship when it comes to our kids it's gross. It's not what we need. And it's just going to lead to more extremism. Right when that passed, I heard from moderate Republicans here in Williamson County reached out to me and said, I'm not going to run again, incumbents on the school board, because they didn't want to deal with a mudslinging fight in a primary. So it's not what we need. It's a shame. And, it's going to get worse before it gets better around here. And I think making school board races partisan is a prime example of that.
Now, you do have a large footprint across the state of Tennessee. You have the Tennessee Holler, but you also have hollers all across, from Chattanooga, Knoxville, Tri-Cities, Memphis, so on. And you try to be a very reliable source, a direct source of information from politicians, asking them direct questions. How do you encourage people to find good sources of information so they can try to hold these elected officials accountable?
Yeah, it's so important. First of all, the regional haulers that you mentioned to me, those are the most important things that we do. And I think the Tennessee haulers' role is really to lift them up, because they're talking to the right audiences about the right things that can hold these accountable. So it's really important that we use regional haulers and try to be a direct source of information. So, we're very video based. So I encourage people to bird dog your representatives, get up there at school board meetings, at county commission meetings with your camera, ask them a question. And what we've learned by doing this for 3 years now is if you ask them the right question, their answer almost doesn't even matter. If they run away, great. If they stand and try to talk to you about it, great. But at the end of the day, you have to ask the right questions, and there's so many questions to ask. So we try to be a direct source of information. We're independent. Our hollers are, locals wherever they are. They all have their different voices, but we say we try to yell the truth, and we really do. If we get something wrong, we try to fix it. It's really about making sure that we get things right so that people know what's really going on in Tennessee, because the way that these people that we're talking about stay in power is by selling a bill of goods about the situation in Tennessee to the people. We're number one in medical bankruptcies. We're at the top in rural hospital closures, at the bottom in poverty, infant maternal mortality. There's so many things that people don't know about because they stand up there like Governor Lee did at the State of the State and talk about how great everything's doing. Well, not every county is Williamson County in Tennessee. There's a lot of people who are really hurting. And unless someone's out there yelling the truth about that stuff, people aren't even going to know. So that's what we try to do with the haulers.
Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a voice for the truth. We think that's really important. And thank you for educating us today on not only what's going on, but how we can get more involved. Thank you. If you are eligible and you haven't already, I encourage you right now to register to vote. You can go to govotennessee.gov. That's the first step. The next is I encourage you to get educated about who is in office, who represents you, and who's running against them. You can download the Go Vote Tennessee app and look it all up in seconds. And once you find out who your reps are, find out where they stand on the issues. Do you care about the environment, gun violence, racial equality? Let them know. And once they're in office, make sure they live up to their promises. Show up to the meetings, write letters, make calls, send emails, tweet at them, but make your voice heard. Also, it's important that we make sure our elections and the processes around them are free, fair, and accessible to all. Voting is a fundamental right. People lost their lives to secure it. The least we can do to honor that sacrifice is to exercise it every chance we get. To get more information on our show here, Public Square, please check out the web at GHS-TV.org, where we are streaming live 24 hours a day. You can also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you again for joining me, Jerry Green, today here on Public Square. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore important topics that involve civic engagement in our community. Thank you.